Okay, welcome back. This is going to be a fairly quick video. My intention here is just to kind of show you enough code that you can get from Visual Basic to C# and start programming. Just a couple of general comments about Visual Studio Community 2013 first. When we start up a project, new project, same as we always have, if you shrink down this Visual Basic tab and open the Visual C# tab under Windows Desktop, we're still going to choose our first Windows Forms application. So exactly the same way we did with the Visual Basic, Windows Forms application still, but again, this time I want the C#. So one thing to note here, Visual Studio 2013 stores your files immediately when you start up the program. And so my suggestion is right from the start, either set your location if you did want to change it, and if not, then type in a meaningful name here at this point. That will save everything in one project folder, and be sure that if you did want to copy it somewhere else later on, you could take the whole folder and you won't have any issues with that. Okay, so I've got a bit of pre-made code here, and it should be very straightforward stuff, but we'll go through it relatively quickly, as I said. So just from the start here, this using section, these are all basically collections of code that your program has, or that my program here has pulled in, things it needs to actually run my program. See, this little minus sign allows me to shrink it. I'm shrinking it only because it's not stuff that I've written and again generated automatically by the program, so I don't want to erase it, but I don't need to see it necessarily because I didn't do anything with it anyways. Your namespace is your actual program here, and then we can have multiple classes in here. Not that important, but same sort of thing. Shrinking the namespace obviously is not a problem because it shrinks everything. But what I'm actually working on here is my class at this point. And so again, really I'm more interested in just the actual code here. And so just seeing how it differs from what we would have seen before. Okay, so an error message right off the bat. Might as well cover this. What's happened here, if I click on the error message, it shows me that this line is a problem. And basically what's happened is I've removed my form load from my other code. I accidentally clicked on the form, made the form load procedure, and didn't have anything in it, so I deleted it. So I'm going to take that line out that actually asks me to access the form load, and then my code comes up properly. So again, basically this came up because I clicked on it, although there's nothing there. When I delete it and try to go back to my form, I get the error message, and that line should be back now with the form load. Now, I wouldn't necessarily advise changing this stuff. This is the designer code, but if it's something like that that you know you've removed, probably it's okay. A better rule of thumb would be basically if you have something in here that you don't like, again, like the form load in this case, just shrinking it down so that you know there's nothing in it is probably fine, or leaving it alone is probably fine as well. So I'll get rid of that one. So this is my actual form, pretty straightforward. I have a list box, a button, a label, and a text box, so exactly as I would in Visual Basic. The code in it is, again, just written in C# now, so the only difference between this and what you'd expect to see in Visual Basic is how the code is written. So variables are declared to start. Int is the variable type, a is the name, obviously. This one is set to 0 to start, and this one does not have an initial value. Semicolons finish every line. Okay, so these are sort of the keys that you'll need to have to be able to actually get something down on paper. My first if statement here, if a is equal to b, of course it won't ever be, but that doesn't matter. The double equal sign is always used for comparisons. The single equal sign means change. So b equals 6 means change b to be equal to 6. If I write this, the computer is either going to give me an error, or it's going to try to interpret it as a is changing to b, but then of course that doesn't make sense in the context of the if statement. So you'll see that red line. Hopefully that'll be enough to remind you, oh yeah, double equals. The message box looks like this now. Again, not too different. MSG box from before, message.messagebox.show now. The content here is going to be written exactly as it was before, except that if you want to have a variable included, it's plus and then the variable name instead of the ampersand. And again, semicolon to finish. So if we use the braces to surround the area, so these are all the statements, sorry, this is the one statement here, but these would be where all the statements that go inside the if statement would go. So between those braces, the else is there. Something I should state, I guess, if you're going to have an else if, it's else space if. So essentially C# uses if and else only, but allows you to do an if, and then here's my else with an if that goes with it. And then here's my else with an if that goes with it, and so on. Else by itself, of course, works exactly as it did in Visual Basic, so it handles all the other cases here. Now, one thing to note, there is no input box in C#, no built-in input box. So what we have to do is essentially tell the computer to use the Microsoft Visual Basic input box instead. So this basically will be how we have to write our input boxes moving forward. An input box by default is inputs a string, and so this other stuff is basically just how we're going to have to write our input box if we want to use a traditional input box. The rest of it is going to be exactly as the input box was. Your message is the first thing and can be the only thing. If you want to just leave it like that, that would be fine. If you want to put a title on the box, it goes there, and if you want a default response, it goes in here. Okay. Now, in order for that to work, you may not be able to see this very well, but I had to go to References over here. I don't know if I can zoom that. I can't. Right-click on References, and I had to add a reference. And then down here, you might be able to see that Microsoft Visual Basic has been selected. So essentially, that tells me to import stuff from the Visual Basic area. And specifically in this case, I'm using just input box. Now, once the value is read in from an input box as a string in this case, I want to change it to a number, and this is how we change from a string to a number. Essentially, the value type int has built-in options we can use with it here. There aren't many. If I press int and this, we see there are just a few different little possibilities here. Parse is probably the one I'm most interested in initially, and it's saying take the input and turn it into an integer, essentially save it as num. I think you'll see, no you won't. Now you could also have done this in a single line, int num equals int.parse bracket, and then the entire Microsoft Visual Basic line up here with the input box in it. So that is an option as well. So almost finished here. If num equals a, this is the symbol for or. This is the symbol for and. So this is the pipe. On a lot of computers, it's right below the backspace. And again, sort of if the numbers, if number equals a or number equals b, here's a message box. Message box works similarly to the input box. This is what's going to be printed, and this is my title. And then finishing up, just an example here of a for loop. And again, these examples don't do anything at all other than show you how to write properly written code in C#. Here I have an example of reading from a text box now. I have an integer called start num. It's going to be parsing the information that's in the text box on the screen. And here is my for loop. And sort of if you remember the for loop in Visual Basic, it said for I equals 1 to 10 essentially is what we were writing, and then we had a step on the end, and then we had something like step 2 on the end to indicate the values by which we want to increase. So this is going to work the same way. For int I equals the starting number, So starting number instead of 1 here is going to be whatever we've typed into our box. This is the condition under which we will continue. As long as I is less than 100, keep going. And then of course this says increase I by 1 each time. And so if you want to change that to increase I by 2 each time, you can do that. There are shortcuts here as well. This I++ off to the side allows you to auto increase by 1. I minus minus would auto increase or auto decrease by 1. And I plus equals a number is the shortcut for what we just saw, I equals I plus 2 in this case, or I equals I plus 5. And so I'm going to run this really quickly. I think you should be able to predict pretty well what it does. It did the initial test, if you remember, it was A equal to 6. It was not, so a message came up. And again, this is just sort of showing the format of the input box. The title was on there, type of message here, and your default response. My default response is going to be, or my response is going to be 6. Same thing here, message box with the message and the title. And then you see my for loop starting at the 0 that was in this box, increasing by 5s because that's what I have here with I equals I plus 5. If I rerun that and put in a different value here, I think you can be pretty clear what's going to happen. Put in a 0, success still, and 35, 45, and so on as we increase. Okay, so that's sort of the transition between Visual Basic and C# in a nutshell. There's lots of code there that kind of should be able to get you started, examples of how to write things. That will be the bigger issue probably at this point, and you can make use of that. Again, as we always have, basically our code is our code, and it's what we're looking to modify as we need to. The code generated by the computer, basically we're just going to leave alone. Good luck.